Alright, I'm Justin Sargent, and I'm here interviewing Nancy Meyer Heiz. Nancy, thanks for joining me for this.
Thank you.
Alright, you have 20 years of experience as a journalist. Tell me about how you first started out.
Well, I studied journalism. First of all, I've always loved people and I've always loved writing. And so I put those two together even in junior high school. I was always writing stories, and when I had an opportunity to join the student newspaper in high school, I did, and just loved it right away. And interestingly, it was the South Kingstown High School newspaper, and it was called The Rebellion. And so there's a little connection there. In any case, and I became editor-in-chief of that publication. So I loved that, and then I studied it in college. So I became a journalism major, double majored in French and journalism.
So after you graduated, what was your first? What did you first start working as professionally?
Originally, I was looking for a job during my internship, my senior year. It was spring semester of my senior year, and I was at the Legislative Gazette up in Albany. And the Legislative Gazette is a rigorous internship program. It's a weekly publication. At that time, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have their website, but it was a weekly newspaper up in Albany, and it was a terrific training ground. So about midway in the semester, the editor gets a call from a former intern who is now editor of a monthly magazine about New York State government and politics. Called him up and said, I've got a managing editor position job opening. I need help. Who have you got for me? And I got the call. So the editor suggested I get the interview, and so I was interviewed and hired right away. The problem was I had to finish my semester.
Right.
So they held the job open for 3 months.
Wow.
And as soon as I graduated, I had a job in Manhattan. So for 2 years, I was managing editor of Empire State Report magazine. And so I really got solid training. At that point, it was on a Mac. It was one of the first desktop publishing systems. And so this is way back in 1990. So, this was early on in desktop publishing. But I assigned stories to freelancers. I wrote stories about infrastructure, education, redistricting, all sorts of things. It was fun.
What was your major works there? What would you say they were?
In my first job, I would say what I loved the best was writing about, it sounds, it may sound insignificant, but to me it was significant, a lot of the environmental issues. Especially the infrastructure funding. For instance, in New York City, the sewers are connected to the storms, so the sewers are connected to the storm drains. And whenever it rains more than 1/4 of an inch, the sewage treatment plants reach their capacity, and all the overflow, so the runoff from the streets plus the raw sewage from people's bathrooms mix. They've always been mixed, but then they bypass the sewage treatment plants, and all that raw sewage gets dumped into the East River and into the bays, and so it becomes a real health hazard. So people can't swim at Rockaway Beach, for instance, for 4 days after it rains.
Yeah.
So funding changes in infrastructure, water, sewer, etc. Those were big issues. The Long Island landfill law was a really big issue when I was at the Gazette and then again at Empire State Report. So just following where the money is going and how municipalities and the state are dealing with big issues that affect all different aspects of the environment and the quality of life for the citizens. But those were big issues that I loved writing those types of stories because I felt I was making a difference.
Sounds significant to me.
Yeah.
So what did your career take you after that, after working there in Manhattan?
I got an opportunity to pursue a job as editor of a twice monthly newspaper in the fashion world. So for almost double the salary.
Nice.
So I took that and really enjoyed doing stories. I had a monthly column. Actually, it was every 2 weeks I wrote the column. Sometimes I'd have guest columnists. In addition to doing all the news reporting, all the feature stories, and the fashion reporting. It was a lot of work. I had a very little freelance budget. So I was really running the whole show at this publication. So that gave me a lot more experience seeing the big picture, being able to set the editorial direction in a cohesive, package content in a cohesive way. And so I did that for 2 years, and I would go to fashion shows, and the women's wear editor, Women's Wear Daily being like the primo publication in fashion, the Women's Wear Daily editor would walk into any of these fashion shows with a photographer in tow and sometimes an illustrator with her, sketch artist, and sit in the front row. And I, prime real estate at a fashion show, and I'd be relegated to the back because my publication was not as prominent or,
Sucks.
Right, and I was taking my own pictures. So all the time I was saying, I want her job. I want to work for Fairchild Publications. And so I made it my mission to work for Fairchild. And so I went over to Fairchild's Human Resources Department with my resume, dropped it off, and they said, we advertise, whenever we have a job opening, we advertise in the New York Times. And I said, okay. So the next Sunday, I see an ad for an editor, and I apply, and I got the job.
Sweet.
And so, I got the interview and then the job. So that was my opening, and the job was a general assignment reporter at Home Furnishings News. And so I spent 14 and a half years at Home Furnishings News in various positions, moving up and around within, the publication as it shifted and changed and, became multimedia.
So what would you say, major changes you went through working from where you first worked in Manhattan on the environmental stories to working for the fashion things, and then finally there at the home?
Well, at Empire State Report, I wasn't a beat reporter. Okay. So as managing editor, I oversaw the day-to-day activities, and I really got to see the big picture. At the fashion publication, I also got to see the big picture, but it was a real niche. So in a way, I was a beat reporter covering just this one niche in fashion and the big picture. Then when I went to HFN, I was uniquely a general assignment reporter for 6 months, and then I was promoted to section editor. So here I was, a section editor responsible for a beat, and I focused on that beat, and I really embedded myself in that beat. I learned the ins and outs. I made it my business to get to know all the power players and develop a relationship with them. I was taking them out to lunch. I would meet them at trade shows, spend a lot of time with them, so that they would tell me information and give me tips whenever a story broke. Hey, Home Depot is cutting its budget. They're not going to be, they're changing the way they're merchandising their lighting, or whatever it was. Bed Bath & Beyond is now, getting into a new category, or prices are rising, or we're getting a lot of cheap imports from China on ceiling fans, and they're not UL certified, or etc. There were so many supply and demand and pricing and back-end issues that I was covering, because this was a trade paper. It was all about the business of home furnishings. And my niche was the lighting and accessory category. So I really became a specialist, and I was when in the early 90s, when halogen torchieres, which are those pole lamps that used to be 300 watts of a halogen bulb, were banned because people were putting them next to curtains and they were lighting fire. I mean, these are very hot bulbs. So when that whole scandal broke, I was on it, and I was breaking news, and I was interviewed by mainstream press. So I was on TV, and I got interviewed by various news outlets. So it was kind of fun to be in a business, doing a business reporting, and then being these big issues flaring up in the mainstream media, and being at the heart of it.
Ah, wow. Well, you have one interesting life. It's been a pleasure talking to you,
Well,
Nancy.
thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate it.